مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. وفاة الرئيس جورج H.W. بوش كانت لحظة مواتية للتعريف الشباب الأمريكيين بتاريخهم، وخاصة سقوط حياة برلين وانهيار الاتحاد السوفيتي ونهاية الحرب الباردة، نهاية انتصرت فيها الولايات المتحدة والغرب. ولكن بعد 30 عاما هل انقضت حقا الحرب الباردة؟ هل تعود روسيا للمنافسة على الهيمنة العالمية من جديد؟ وماذا ينبغي أن تفعل الولايات المتحدة لمجابهة هذا الخطر؟ هذا الأسبوع في برنامج داخل واشنطن ضيفي هما خبيرا الأمن القومي Peter Hussey with Stephen Blank. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. After years of focusing on the threat from Islamic extremism and terrorism, our national security strategy has now identified as our principal national adversary states, big states, major states, especially Russia and China. So today we're talking with Stephen Blank and Peter Hussey to ask, are we about to enter, or are we in a new Cold War? Gentlemen, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So, in 2012, candidate Mitt Romney was ridiculed for saying that Russia was the greatest security threat to the United States. Was he right, Stephen?
Well, at the time, I don't think he was right. I think that China is an even bigger security threat to the United States and was so even then, even though it was less of a challenge at that time. But it's certainly clear that since 2012, Mr. Putin has decided that he wants to challenge the United States wherever he can, globally, in fact. Yeah. And as a result, the Russian challenge has grown way beyond anything at that time Governor Romney was talking about.
So, Peter, are we in a new Cold War?
We've been in conflict with Russia and China for a long time. The key has been to make sure that conflict did not erupt into military conflict and, God forbid, go from the military to nuclear. So it's been across the board. Cyber, you've seen economic warfare, you've seen what Putin has done in China. So yes, if you want to call it a Cold War, call it a Cold War. We are in a very deep, important, serious conflict, and that new commission, which was totally bipartisan, 6 Democrats, 6 Republicans, that Ambassador Edelman and Kathleen Hicks co-chaired. They talked about at the Reagan Forum out in California on not too long ago, all emphasized a unanimous conclusion that Russia and China are our serious threats, but they have friends, and their friends are North Korea and Iran and Syria and Venezuela, and those folks also have other friends, which are the terror groups, which we spent most of the last 20 years worrying about. They're still around. The thing is that the commission basically said, as this administration has now said, we have some real, as you said, big states that are at the top of the list of our challengers.
So how do we differentiate, normal international competition, trying to get advantage, a little bit of spying, a little bit of stealing, the sort of thing that big countries have been doing since the beginning of time? How do we differentiate that from a serious threat to our national security?
Well, I think you distinguish that by seeing what the behavior is of the countries that are involved. And in both cases, Russia and China, we see what an Israeli scholar, Dima Adamski, calls cross-domain coercion, that they are attempting to coerce allies and partners of the United States by all means, not just military, but by all means at their disposal. So we see incidents of force, invasion of Ukraine, the recent incident in the Kerch Strait in November of 2018, China's attempts to impose its rule on the South China Sea by force, its probes in the East China Sea. But we also see economic warfare, China's Belt and Road Initiative, Russia's attempt to use the energy card, and then finally there's cyber. We know of major Chinese attempts to hack into American corporations and the government. The Marriott Corporation, for example, was the target in the fall of 2018 of a massive Chinese hack. We know about the Russian intervention in the 2016 and 2018 elections, and of course Russia's cyber and media interventions all over Europe. So here we see multiple acts of aggressive intent carried out in multiple domains with the intent of coercing people. multi-domain coercion.
So, would you describe the current situation as threatening today as the Cold War was back in the day?
Let me make the difference in the Cold War. We were worried about primarily one Russian activity, or Soviet activity, and that was invading Western Europe through the Fulda Gap. That was where we thought we could trigger a nuclear war if the Russians went west. In China's case, it was taking over Taiwan. North Korea was invading South Korea. And those threats are now, with Russia, is Secretary Mattis, our defense secretary, made the point of Putin is like a thief in a five-star hotel. He walks up and down the hallway, and if the door's open, when he tries the knob, he goes in.
Very opportunistic.
Takes everything that he can and then leaves. And if the door's locked or someone pushes back, someone's in there, leaves it alone. But it's an all of government, as Steve points out. It's cyber, it's economic, but the Chinese are the worst, because when I hosted a dinner years ago with the head of NSA,
the National Security
Agency, I apologize for but the general told us at a dinner at the National Defense University, China is stealing $100 to $150 billion a year of American business technology. That reduces their productivity. Their productivity goes down, salaries go down, they don't go up. So that's what they're stealing from the American worker. That same general now says it's $300 billion a year, and that's just from American business. That's not American government, for example. So it's not the Cold War. We're going to have a cataclysmic attack like in Western Europe, and we're going to have to be faced with, holy cow, what do we do? Do we use nukes to stop the Russian invasion? This is an all-of-government constant attack on all our institutions. And the Chinese said something very recently very interesting. They said, we had nothing to do with the creation of the post-World War II security environment, whether the World Bank or GATT or the World Trade Organization or NATO, all the security encumbrances that are basically keep the world in one piece and prosperous and more democratic. They said, we had nothing to do with that, and we have no interest in it. The Russians have that same attitude. So they want to create their own rules, and it's like a mob family saying, this is the rule today now, Mr. Shop Owner. You give us $10,000 every month.
This is what I wanted to ask you. What is the objective for Moscow and Beijing?
Good point.
Do they want the decline and defeat of the United States?
Yes.
Do they want a different world order?
Yes.
What do they want?
They want actually both. They
Yes.
want the U.S. They can't get the reversal of the current world order without the defeat and decline of the United States.
Exactly.
Because
Yes.
the United States is the principal force that upholds world order. Give you an example. Maritime freedom of seas, which is now an international principle. And the United States has gone to war twice over that. World War I, War of 1812. So we're not having an academic discussion. Both Russia and China are challenging that. Iran is to a lesser extent. Nuclear proliferation in Korea. Both Russia and China essentially stand behind North Korea and have publicly stated that they support the North Korean negotiating position, which is so far reluctant to give up any meaningful concession on its nuclear weapons. I would argue that Russia and China are allies, and that quite frankly we see that they are both striking at America through this multi-domain effort and striking at American allies as well.
Collectively, together.
Both collectively and individually, but
Yes.
you never see China criticize Russia or vice versa.
It's very different. And the thing that's interesting is the Chinese and Russians both have said, we don't have any interest in the order that you created. We want you to play by these new rules, but by the way, we will make them up as we go along, which is what the Russians and Chinese have done. In the South China Sea, you're talking about an area of $17 trillion of trade by 2030 and 5 billion people population-wise, because India is going to be 1.7 billion and China is going to be around 1 to 1.3 billion, depending on whether they decline, as some people think, because as they age. But that's a huge number of people, huge amount of trade. They want to control it. That's why they're buying up seaports all over the world, saying, if you have ships come into this port, if they're U.S. bottoms, meaning U.S. ships bringing U.S. goods, you have to obey our rules. This is a very different way than saying, oh, let's change the rules a little bit here, or amend GATT or World Trade. That's why the push by the administration to change the trading relationship with China and stop the currency manipulation and stop the theft of intellectual property, it's not just a trade deal. This goes to the heart of China's leverage that they thought they could use, as Steve says, to completely change the world's security arrangement.
So you gentlemen have argued not only that Russia and China are playing fast and loose with the, say, the international trading system and trying to make their own rules,
yes,
but that they lie and cheat and steal.
Yes.
Let's take a look, for example, at your argument about intermediate nuclear weapons and why you suggest that the administration, the Trump administration, is right to pull the United States from a treaty it has with Russia on this.
Let's be clear. We have not pulled out. We first would have to say we're going to, which requires 6 months. And we went with Mrs. Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, and she said, give me 60 days or 90 days. Let me work with the Russians. The Russians just recently came out and said, well, let's have inspections of what you think we're violating and what we think you're violating. They think our missile defenses in Europe, we could take an interceptor on it, which is just a kinetic kill, meaning it just runs into something, and we'll put something explosive on it and make it offensive. Well, it's baloney, but that's what they want to inspect. We then could inspect their, because the Intermediate Forces Treaty of 1987 is a treaty on missiles that are land-based. You can do it from sea, you can do it from air, but the range is less and it's much cheaper to do land-based missiles. And the problem is there's no restrictions on China. As Steve and I were talking about earlier, what if we said, we're willing to renegotiate, get the treaty, get the Russians back in the treaty, if they comply, but we have to have verifiable inspections, because right now we know they're violating it. We've shown the Europeans the data, and basically the Europeans have unanimously come up and said, yeah, you're right, America, because previously we didn't give the technical data to the Europeans. But the problem is China is not a signatory, and they're building literally thousands of those kinds of missiles armed with just conventional weapons all over where they can range all over the the Western Pacific.
Being in an arms control agreement just with the Russians any longer?
I don't think so. As we were talking before we came on, I believe with Peter that if there is to be a restoration of the INF Treaty, that and for that matter, any really serious arms control treaty, China needs to be in the room for a number of reasons. China is a great power, and we have to accept that that's the fact, but they also, if they're going to be a great power, can no longer be free riders, to use an American term. That is, somebody who just goes along with it, benefits from a treaty without having to incur any obligations on that treaty. So, for example, the New START Treaty, which is strategic nuclear weapons, doesn't have China in it, and they can build as many strategic nuclear weapons as they like, and nobody really knows how many they have, what their capabilities are, and where they're based, and so on. I think that if China wants to show the world that it's a great power, and there's no doubt that they want to show the world they're a great power, then they have to be involved in arms control negotiations and accept some of the costs and burdens of that. And to the degree that they then accept that there will be verifiable inspection regimes for all the parties involved, US, Russia, and China, that is a major step forward for non-proliferation, for Iran and North Korea, and even possibly India and Pakistan as well.
Yes.
So it is important, I think, from the interests of the United States as well as from the interests of global peace, that the Chinese be part of these arms control regimes and not be outside where they are totally free to do what they like and thus transform the strategic landscape in threatening ways.
Okay. I think one thing, in 1982, Deng Xiaoping, and in 1981, Antropov, both decided to sell and transfer nuclear weapons technology to their allies. What we see in Korea and what we see in Iran and Pakistan and India is a result of that. We saw it in Libya, we saw it in Iraq. So that there are real world consequences. We're now living with those decisions because they thought, well, if they arm our enemies, America's enemies, we'll be in a tougher position and a weaker position. And now you can obviously see this is a real problem. Iraq's nuclear weapons, Libya's nuclear weapons program, Iraq's nuclear program, North Korea's real weapons, and Iran's search for nuclear weapons. You now know those are four of the big issues that we have had to deal with in the previous two administrations and now this administration. So it's deadly serious stuff.
I might also.
I'm going to have to hold you for there for a minute. When we come back, we're going to discuss what we should do about all these problems in just a moment. Our panelists again today include Stephen Blank. Stephen is a senior fellow at the American Foreign Policy Council here in Washington. Previously, he served as professor of Russian National Security Studies and professor of National Security Affairs at the U.S. Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. A prolific author, he has published more than 1,000 articles and 15 books on a broad range of foreign policy issues. Sitting to his left is Peter Husey. Peter is Director of Strategic Deterrence Studies at the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies and President of Geostrategic Analysis. His 40 years experience has included serving at the National Defense University Foundation, the American Foreign Policy Council, and the Air Force Association. His op-eds and editorials have appeared in the Washington Times, The Hill, National Review, and Fox News. All right, gentlemen, let me ask you a broad question. Two big theories about how the Cold War ended. One is that the internal contradictions and weakness of the Soviet system just caught up with them and they eventually collapsed. The other is that it was American action, our spending, our military budgets that hastened that process and compelled their collapse. Which was it?
Both.
That we
Both.
made it happen
Both.
or
No.
they collapsed?
No major event in world politics happens because of one reason. It is both. It's an interactive process between the pressure that the United States, particularly under the Reagan and Bush administrations, put on them, and the internal contradictions of the system. So that when a person like Gorbachev came along and saw some of those internal contradictions and tried to address them, he found he couldn't, and the situation kept getting worse for them because of the pressure of competition with the United States, even though once he started making reforms, the Cold War started coming to an end over the 6-year period of his tenure. So it's not a question of this or that, it's both.
Yeah. So how does this assessment color your view of the current situation? I mean, Putin is playing a pretty weak hand brilliantly.
Yes.
Russia is a fundamentally weak country, but it is playing above its weight, as we say in America. Does that color how we should respond to the challenge?
The reason my company is called Geostrategic Analysis is geography. The geography of the Russian threats to Eastern Europe or to Western Europe are right on its border. They can go across into the Baltics or other places much quicker than we can get there. So that's a problem. The China also, with respect to the South China Sea and Taiwan, they're right there, as in Korea. So the question then is, alliances are critical to us. The ability to project power is critical. And when you look at what the Russians and Chinese are trying to do, they're trying to prevent us from being able to project power by weakening our alliances. China's whole goal has been to get us out of East Asia. The nuclear program in North Korea was to split the alliance between the U.S. and South Korea, and that the South Koreans would make a deal with the North, but part of that deal would be we go away, which is what the Chinese have been trying to do for years. Add into it the economic, trade, and investment aspects. And it is, as Steve said, this is an all-of-government effort by these countries to change the international system so that we're weaker, we withdraw, and they be able to exercise influence that we do now, but they would later, and basically bring us down. And the question is, with our alliances and with our monetary strength and military strength, and the place we do it terribly is information. And that's why a show like yours, God bless you for doing this, because we're terrible at talking about what these issues are and what we ought to be doing. We always are so, like an INF treaty. We didn't get out of the treaty. We're still in it. The people who destroyed the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty were the Russians. And finally, Europe has got it. But if you look at most of the media coverage, we're the bad guys because we have said to called the Russians, called them on this. So when you look at the strategy, whether this administration or previous administrations, it has to be an all-of-government effort. It cannot be, okay, we'll build more weapons, or we'll sign a treaty, or we'll increase the strength of the alliance. It's got to be everything, and that's what this commission I talked about, which was bipartisan. Kathleen Hicks is a Democrat, Ambassador Edelman a Republican. Every member of the House and Senate Armed Services Committee leadership appointed 3 people. 6 Democrats, 3 Republicans. They were unanimous in their view that China and Russia are absolutely critical threats to our national security.
All right,
Yes.
gentlemen, we're going to have to stop there. Stephen Blank, Peter Husey, thank you so much for helping explain this very serious global situation to our viewers.
Thank you for doing this, Bob.
Thank you, Bob.
Take care.
If I could, I would change the separation now, the bipartisanship. I feel like nothing's really getting accomplished that's affecting everyday people like myself. You know, the tax cuts aren't affecting me. The tariffs aren't really helping me. So I think if they could come together, that there will be more benefit to average everyday people like myself, you know, middle class, that where I can see some tangible effects that the government's having in my life.
Power to fix anything in Washington, I think it would be that the people here would recognize the importance of civility, which I think is something that our founding fathers chose as a really important value, but it's really been lost.
I remember it like yesterday, the second week of November 1989. I was driving to London. On the radio, the BBC correspondent described the scene in Berlin, where thousands of East Germans, intoxicated with the prospect of freedom and other things, were streaming over the wall, the menacing concrete structure that separated East and West. It was a moment for delirious, unvarnished joy. Later that same day, my wife likes to recall, I was already beginning to pour cold water on the celebration by prophesying to her that the fall of the wall, while undoubtedly welcome news, was likely to unleash terrible forces that had been locked up for decades. Extreme nationalism, ethnic rivalries, revenge. It didn't take too long for Yugoslavia to prove me right. But what I didn't foresee was that the death of one Cold War didn't mean the death of all Cold Wars. And there's a strong argument today that Russia, under Vladimir Putin, is eager to fight the Cold War over again, this time aiming for a different outcome. He wants Russia to be a great power, on par with America, a country either admired or feared by all. He does this by recreating bits and pieces of the Soviet Empire. When others are distracted, he takes advantage, as in Syria. He's willing to live by the motto, the enemy of my enemy is a friend, which explains his alliance with Iran. And he's willing even to send his spies, hackers, and agents to kill enemies in democratic countries like Britain and to undermine democratic elections, as they try to do here in the United States. But like between the Soviet Union of old, Russia today is a fundamentally weak state. Other than some natural or near-natural resources, caviar, vodka, fur, and oil, it produces nothing the world wants, except perhaps weapons. And it is relatively small. Its population is 30% smaller than Brazil, and just a little over a third as populous as the United States. Yes, Putin has figured out how to play poker well. He makes the most of a weak hand, as in Syria. But we shouldn't inflate the threat and give him credit for being leader of a truly great power. Is there another Cold War? Not necessarily. If we stay firm, strong, and clear-eyed, recognizing that Russia is an ambitious but fundamentally weak state, then we can contain the risk without the risk defining our times the way the Cold War defined our parents' times. The past is often prologue, but not always. بهذا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة وخاصة حول السياسة الروسية في الشرق الأوسط، أرجو أن تتواصلوا معي عبر تويتر على هاشتاغ InsideWashington أو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على @RobSatloff. سأراكم الأسبوع المقبل وإلى أن ألقاكم. شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.